I have lived a life without shame, a hedonistic romp of passion and pleasure reserved for the privileged few. I partook of red roses, silks and wines, the finest flavors and succor of all luxuries. Most of all, I partook of love. Not in any sense of the heart, but the sensual titillation of the flesh and the body's willing throes. All of these delightful scandals beneath the delicate veil of a proper lady's poise and dignity, the blessings of a double life, and all of them mine. Even now, I regret nothing, though my indiscretion has led me to this bitter end. You see, my greatest pleasure was adoration from men, and my lust was insatiable. I was the Lady Camille, temptress of the house Parisot, and I handpicked only the finest from my personal garden of suitors. The faithful left their wives for me, the powerful renounced their titles for me, the wealthy surrounded their estates for me. I was the dirty gossip in everyone's mouths, and some called me a harlot. Yet, the man came in secret from near and far, all at the call of the rumors, all prepared to do whatever necessary if only for one night in my bed. So it had been since the early days of my youth, and I enjoyed it all. I enjoyed the gifts, the pampering, and the worship, the power. I enjoyed the fact that man would sacrifice their dignity for me, or maybe it wasn't really for me, but rather some contest amongst themselves. Maybe somewhere along the line I had become more of an object of status than desire. Perhaps it was not my beauty that brought them to me, but each one's desire to be the only man who ever truly claimed me as his own where all others had failed. I had considered the possibility, but it was all the same for me. Regardless of what brought them, they still came by the tens, by the hundreds, and I eventually bored of their efforts. For they had time and again failed to provide me with the one thing I sought, the one thing they all took away from the experience even as I cast them out: pleasure. True pleasure, a night of fiery passion in which I could lose myself, and a lover unparalleled in the art. In my desire, I came to indulge in tales of romance, Jane Austen's Sense and Sensibility, Samuel Richardson's Virtue Rewarded. I even delved into the ancient Hellenistic romances of Chariton, Achilles Tatius, and Heliodorus. Predating them all were the tales of ancient Greece, and therein I found mention of a most curious creature. They called it the incubus, an evil thing of seduction that took women in their own beds, lay atop of them with carnal intention in the night, and most often against their will. Most would be terrified, but I found it fascinating. The idea of bedding a demon enticed me, for surely such an otherworldly thing would not fail me as had all men before it. It was no man, after all. It was a foolish fantasy, and I should have left it as such, but I could not. Fantasy was my life, indulgence my charge, my journey for the ultimate good. I was never one to second-guess my desires, never had much reason to worry over consequences. It was just another game, something to enjoy whether or not I truly believed. And so, I played the game. I won't divulge the details of the ritual here. I mean this to serve as an admittance of my mistake, perhaps as a warning for those who would repeat it, not as a set of instructions. I hope the lesson you take from it will be for the better. Suffice it to say that when the summoning ritual was complete, he was to come to me in the twilight of a dream. Whether that meant he was to appear in my dreams or in half-consciousness before a dream, I'm not sure. Nevertheless, whichever it meant, that is indeed when it began. Next I was aware, I found myself in the fold of darkness, a darkness so deep that it invaded my every sense. It tasted sour and smelled the same, and it felt like a breeze over short hairs. It sounded like the vastness of an unreturned echo, and I saw him. He had a glow all his own, a low-cast flickering of warm flames unseen, and he appeared to me as tall, statuesque, olive-toned model of male perfection. He stood there in a sheer garment not of this place or time, and he smiled at me. I dare say my heart stood still in wait for the sound of his voice, but he never spoke a word. Instead, I was answered with a freezing gale at my back and the biting, dry touches of what felt like snow. I sat there trying to shelter myself from the cold, and I had nearly forgotten him before his arms wrapped around me from behind and brought me warmth. When he lay atop of me, I felt the same salacious horror so many Greek women must have felt so many thousands of years ago. Passion is a versatile thing. It has many faces, many meanings, and I learned them all in the hours that followed. I was a prisoner to those feelings, swept away, and lost in a torrent I could not control or truly understand. The heat of ecstasy swept over me like an inferno, emotion like a storm. He proved to be the lover I had hoped for and more, and for a time, naught existed but him and me. Eternal and mortal at the same time, it was like feeling unlike any other in this world of flesh. It was something deeper, more powerful, and more elegant. But it wasn't to last. No climax came to me, and I next found myself hurled into a maelstrom of emotions made real. All facets of passion, all glorious and terrible, coerced me in body and mind as we were swallowed by a raging field of flames without horizon. My blissful reverie turned to the first passion, that of unwilling rage and horror as I looked on him once more, now changed to something terrible and beautiful. Enormous wings framed his form, a kind neither angel nor demon. They outstretched to an impossible span, almost intimidating in its vastness. I heard him cry in satisfaction, a thundering roar to the skies, and I looked up to see his face. He donned great curving horns and a grin of ivory daggers, the visage of a true devil, and his eyes held a menacing fire. This was the image I stared upon as the flames licked at me, reducing me to ash in a slow, agonizing procession, and ever in a sinister lover's embrace. Even as I collapsed into dust, my nerves remained alert to the burning pain of his splendorous writhing, and my sight remained to witness the last contrast shapes of his body in the dying glow of the receding flames. And the darkness took me once more. In the unstirring darkness for a brief eternity I ceased to be. Therein I felt the second passion of sorrow, of abandonment, and longing for a world I took for granted as my mind slipped away. I fell from the surface of life and the breath of the living, and I lamented on the folly of my selfishness. I settled into the finality of death, and there I lay, silent and gone, until the darkness parted from a firmament of melancholy grey. Suddenly I was whole again, laying in a field of black primrose and lilac. I lay beneath a low overcast of heavy rain clouds, and they sprinkled an unpleasant chill over my feverish skin. I could see a dark figure before me, a kneeling wraith in a cloak of misty shadows. The sight roused incessant, wrenching pains at my core. These I found as I stared at the figure of the mound of my own swollen belly, where the pangs of labor and the heaviness of a pregnancy past due. I suffered a lonely torment for which I could have never prepared, for which I had no support, as the wraith knelt silently before me to receive the birth. Each push called a new pain, each new pain called another push, and my wails of agony drifted away on the whisper of a breeze. I knew almost immediately that this was no earthly bearing. This child did not merely submit to the coming of its first breath. It struggled desperately within me, clawing for the surface. After countless hours of this suffering, what may have been the days of the robed figure's unwavering patience, my child emerged at last. With one last cry of pain and anguish, he crawled forth from me as a blackened, inhuman mass, with a tail and stubs of horns twitching in its movements as it made its way to the arms of the robed shadow of dark mist. My vision and mind swam in a haze from exhausted relief, and I felt the final passion of a mother's separation and loss. I felt the dire wrong committed against me as the shadow of a man walked away with my baby, and I felt the shame of the sin for birthing such a thing. I felt helplessness settle over me as the shadow vanished from sight and left me unmended, left me to die in my gored wounds and afterbirth. With that, it all washed away like a nightmare and left me to my rest. I can't say that I remember much afterward, only that I somehow ended up in the cell as an unkempt mess. But I hear the whispering of the guards, and I've pieced it together for myself. They say that they found me the next morning, huddled in a corner in my bedding, shivering and pleading with wide eyes for the shadow to return my child. I don't know how long I've been here. My hair grows longer, grayer. I grow thinner, pale, and unhealthy. Most of all, I feel the passion I so adored slipping away from me like a bleeding wound. When time has left me dry and numb, I know that my life will come to an end, but I still regret nothing. For it is difficult to feel regret when you feel nothing at all. Whatever passion I had, I left that night in the embrace of a demon. Whatever caring and love I had, I left that night with my unholy child long since lost. And it is that child's name in which I now surround myself, carved and written on the walls by my own hand, a name whispered to me in the final moments of my sanity. And so, he was called Momus, god of ridicule, spirit of a monster's son. My days draw to an end. I can feel it. My rest will not be peaceful, for my sin against humanity cannot be forgiven, nor should it. As it all ends, I only truly feel one emotion. I am ashamed to say, I long for his touch once more, for but one last night in his bed.